I woke to a sound no homeowner ever wants to hear at midnight. Metal scratching against metal. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. A thief doesn't fumble. A thief tests. For a moment, I lay perfectly still in bed, my breathing shallow. My house had been quiet when I locked up hours earlier. Now the faint echo of tools at work sent a chill up my spine. I slipped out of bed, careful not to creak the floorboards. My eyes darted toward the hallway, toward the one place in this house no one should ever be. My study. Every step closer, the sound grew sharper, steadier. A man working at a lock he didn't understand. I froze at the door. My pulse thudded in my ears. And then I heard a whisper. A man's voice, familiar. Connor. My son-in-law. Most men would have thrown the door open right then, caught him red-handed. But I didn't move. I pressed my palm flat against the wall, steadying myself as my stomach turned. Connor Hayes. The same man the neighborhood adored. A firefighter who'd pulled children from burning homes. The husband who made my daughter Rachel smile wider than I'd seen in years. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to know about the safe. But there he was, in the dead of night, trying to pry open what I'd buried decades ago. You might be wondering, what was inside? Not gold, not bonds, not family heirlooms. What I kept locked away was far heavier than that. Documents, blueprints, notes from my years in defense engineering. Things I was never meant to take with me when I left the industry. Things that could ruin careers, maybe even lives, if they ended up in the wrong hands. Things Connor couldn't possibly understand.
I leaned close, peering through the crack of the door. His tall frame hunched in the glow of his phone's flashlight. He wasn't fumbling. He wasn't guessing. He'd done this before, breaking into safes. The sight turned my blood cold. He muttered something under his breath, but before I could catch the words, the light flicked off. The scratching stopped. And just like that, Connor slipped out of the study, closing the door behind him. I waited 5 long minutes before moving. My hand trembled slightly as I pushed the door open. The air inside felt heavier, as if it knew what had just been attempted. At first glance, nothing seemed touched. The books stood in neat rows. The desk looked orderly. But then I saw it. Thin, fresh scratches etched around the safe's handle. He'd been close. Too close. I crouched there in silence, my reflection staring back at me from the steel. Older, weathered, but still sharp enough to know exactly what I was dealing with. Connor wasn't just curious. He was hunting. The next morning at breakfast, he greeted me with that easy smile of his, the kind neighbors found charming. He poured coffee, cracked a joke about the weather, and talked about a late-night call at the firehouse. Rachel laughed, resting her hand over his. She believed every word. But when his eyes flicked up to meet mine, I caught it, the smallest flicker of unease, a man checking if he'd been seen. I held his gaze a moment longer than necessary, then nodded, as if nothing was wrong. But inside, my chest tightened. Because I knew. And worse, I suspected Rachel knew too.
That evening, I walked the property, checking every lock twice, my mind racing. I thought about the secrets buried in that safe, not treasures, burdens. I'd built that vault into the house long ago, not for wealth, but to contain pieces of a past I couldn't share. Back when my work wasn't just a job, but a matter of national defense, when a mistake could cost lives. Those files weren't for my daughter's husband. They weren't for anyone. And yet, someone had told him. Someone had tempted him. As I locked the study door, I found myself staring at the safe again, my reflection warped in the steel. Connor thought he was clever, thought he could steal from me without consequence. But he'd forgotten one thing. I've lived long enough to know how to handle thieves, especially the ones who marry their way inside your home. I sat on the porch that night, bourbon in hand, staring into the quiet dark. The neighborhood seemed so peaceful. Kids' bikes abandoned on lawns, porch lights glowing warmly down the block. But inside my home, the battle lines had shifted. My daughter was in bed, trusting her husband beside her. And me? I was alone, planning, watching, waiting. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Because the moment I did, it wouldn't just expose him, it might expose Rachel, too. What would you do if the man your daughter married started sneaking around your house at night? Subscribe, like, and share. Let's find out together.
The morning after that long night, I walked into my study with a sharper eye. At first glance, everything looked the same. My desk was neat, the shelves lined with books, the photographs untouched. But when you've lived long enough, you learn how to notice the smallest things, and the smallest things often shout the loudest. One book, the one I kept about Cold War-era engineering breakthroughs, was pulled just half an inch further out than the rest. A drawer, usually flush with the cabinet, sat ever so slightly ajar. Most people wouldn't see it, but I did. Somebody had been testing boundaries. Someone wanted me to believe they hadn't been there at all. I ran my hand slowly across the desk, pausing at the drawer handle. Inside were just papers, contracts, and a fountain pen I hadn't touched in years. Nothing of real value, but the message was clear. Whoever had been in here wasn't clumsy. They were careful. And careful men don't stop after the first try. That evening, when the house had settled again, I went back to the study. This time, I crouched by the safe, angling the flashlight from my phone across the metal. And there it was. Fine, fresh scratch marks across the lock. Not deep, not reckless. The kind left by someone probing with tools, trying combinations, hoping for an opening. Connor wasn't just snooping anymore. He was prying. I sat back in my chair, staring at the steel door, weighing the storm rising inside me. Part of me wanted to storm into their bedroom, grab him by the collar, and throw him out of my house. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. Because if I was wrong, I'd lose Rachel forever. And if I was right, then I needed to know exactly how deep this betrayal went.
The next day, Connor carried himself as though nothing had happened. He kissed Rachel on the cheek before leaving for a shift, coffee thermos in hand, whistling as he went out the door. But the way he glanced back at me, just for a second, no longer than a blink, confirmed it. He was checking me, measuring whether I suspected anything. He didn't know I'd already seen the scratches. He didn't know I was watching. That afternoon, I drove across town to an electronics shop. The young clerk behind the counter probably thought I was another retiree trying to learn how to program a smart TV. He didn't ask why I needed a discreet, wireless camera with motion activation. He just rang me up and handed me the box. Back home, I installed it carefully in the corner of the study, angled directly at the safe, invisible to the naked eye unless you knew exactly where to look. It was the kind of insurance I hadn't thought I'd need again at my age. Yet here I was, preparing as though I were back in the field, setting up surveillance for an enemy target. Except
This target wasn't foreign. He ate breakfast at my table every morning. That night, I lay awake listening. The house creaked the way old houses do, the refrigerator hummed, the wind pushed softly against the shutters. But beneath it all, I listened for something else, those faint metallic scratches. Nothing came. Not that night. But I knew better than to be lulled into comfort. When a man shows you he's willing to cross a line once, he'll cross it again.
Rachel noticed my silence at dinner the following evening. She reached across the table, her voice soft. "Dad, are you okay? You've seemed distracted." I forced a smile. "Just tired, sweetheart. Long week." Connor glanced at me over his glass of water. He said nothing, but the smirk that tugged at the corner of his mouth told me all I needed to know. He thought he was winning. He thought he was careful enough to get away with it. That smirk sealed it. Later, when the lights were out and the house slipped into sleep, I sat alone in the darkened study, my eyes fixed on the blinking light of the hidden camera, armed and ready. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands across my chest. I wouldn't confront him. Not yet. I'd let him walk right into the trap. Would you confront him immediately, or set a trap to catch him red-handed? Please, let me know in the comments section.
The camera had been running for 3 nights without catching much, just shadows and dust motes floating in the glow of the nightlight. But on the 4th night, everything changed. I sat alone in the study at dawn, coffee cooling in my hands, eyes fixed on the laptop screen. The feed began as it always did, the door creaking open, Connor slipping inside like a thief in his own home. His face was calm, determined, his hands gloved as he crouched in front of the safe. I leaned forward, every muscle tense. He worked the lock with quiet precision, the kind of patience I'd only seen in men trained for delicate operations. He wasn't fumbling. He knew what he was doing. But then, something I didn't expect. The door opened again. Rachel stepped into the study. My daughter. For a split second, I thought she had caught him, that she would scream, demand an explanation, expose him for what he was. But she didn't. She closed the door softly behind her, crossed the room, and crouched beside him. Her hand brushed his shoulder, her lips moving in a whisper I could barely catch through the faint audio feed. "Try the lower dial again. Dad said once it sticks around 4. My chest hollowed out. Encouragement. Not shock, not outrage. Encouragement. I replayed the clip 3 times, convinced I was mishearing. But no, she was helping him. The coffee went cold in my hands. The trust I had carried all her life, that bond between father and daughter, fractured like thin glass under a hammer. Rachel wasn't a victim. She was complicit.
I shut the laptop, staring at the floor as memories of her childhood flooded me. Her first bike ride, the way she used to sit on my lap and beg me to tell her bedtime stories about the machines Daddy built. She'd been my pride, my anchor after her mother passed. And now she stood in my study, working against me, guiding the man I already suspected. Why? Money? Greed? No, her words cut deeper than that. Dad said once it sticks around 4. She wasn't guessing. She had been listening to things I'd let slip years ago about the safe, things I thought were harmless little stories. And then it hit me. They weren't after money. They believed there was something more, something tied to my past life, the part I never shared in full detail. My years as an engineer working on classified defense projects.
building technology meant to tip the balance of wars before they ever began. That safe didn't hold cash or jewelry. It held documents, schematics, fragments of research I had kept not for profit, but for protection. Insurance. Warner wanted it, and Rachel knew it. I left the study and wandered down the hall, pausing outside their bedroom door. Their voices floated through, low, muffled, almost tender. Rachel laughed at something he said. The sound twisted inside me like a knife. My own daughter was laughing with the man she was helping betray me.
That night at dinner, I watched them carefully. Connor cut into his steak with the same steady hands I'd seen working the safe. Rachel poured him wine, her smile radiant, and for the first time, I wondered if her love for him had replaced her love for me. Had she chosen him over her father, or had she always been waiting for a chance to dig into my secrets? Every word they spoke tasted like poison. Rachel asked about my day. Connor joked about the firehouse, about old men still trying to keep up with 20-year-olds. I forced a laugh, but inside, my chest burned. Because I knew something they didn't. The trap was no longer just about Connor. It was about her. Later that night, I sat again in the darkened study, staring at the safe. My reflection warped in the steel door. For decades, that safe had been just a container of memories. Now it was the fulcrum of the trail, the magnet drawing greed into my home. And the cruelest twist of all, my blood was helping fuel it. I whispered into the stillness of the room, words only the walls would ever hear. I can handle an enemy, but how do I fight my own daughter? The silence gave me no answer. What would hurt you more, your son-in-law betraying you or your own daughter helping him? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
The house was still, shadows pressed against the walls, the kind of silence that only comes when everyone believes they're safe. But I wasn't safe. Not anymore. I sat in my study, hands moving with the precision of the engineer I once was. The safe stood open. Inside, instead of classified notes and schematics, I placed a single black flash drive, custom-made, encrypted, laced with tracking software that would sing like a beacon the moment someone plugged it in. It looked ordinary, but it was bait. And bait had to be left where predators could find it. By the time I closed the safe, my hands were steady. My heart wasn't. I thought of Rachel's face, her whisper in the recording, her laughter at dinner, the warmth she shared with Connor that I had once thought was genuine. Now, I didn't know if anything about her was genuine, but I needed answers. Answers only betrayal could reveal. I turned off the study lamp and headed upstairs, making just enough noise to sell the illusion of exhaustion. The floorboards creaked, the bathroom sink ran, the bedroom door shut. Then, silence. Except I wasn't sleeping. I sat upright in bed, watching the faint glow of the hallway nightlight under the door. My ears tuned for movement. And sure enough, after an hour, the sound came. Soft footsteps. A door easing open. The faint squeak of hinges I knew by heart. The study. I imagined them creeping across the carpet, Rachel's hand slipping into Connor's, her voice trembling as she whispered encouragement. They thought they were careful. They thought they were clever. They thought I was asleep. Minutes passed like hours until I heard the faintest metallic click. The safe. I pictured Connor's grin when he saw the flash drive, Rachel's relief that he had succeeded. Every second scraped against me like sandpaper. Not because of what they were stealing, but because of who was stealing it. Rachel. My blood. Her nervous whisper carried faintly through the walls, too muffled for words but enough to twist in my chest like a blade. I could imagine what she was saying. Hurry. We need to go. Dad can't know. It wasn't the theft that broke me. It was the choice. Her choice. The door eased shut again. Footsteps padded down the hallway. A car engine murmured outside, then faded into the night. They had the drive. Exactly as I planned. I sat in the dark, staring at my cell phone. My thumb hovered over a number I hadn't dialed in years. Frank Doyle. Once an FBI agent, now retired in Florida. He'd been my contact back when my work crossed paths with federal oversight. A man I trusted with classified truths. A man who had kept my secrets when others wouldn't.
Calling him meant dragging Rachel into this mess. Calling him meant exposing her. And I wasn't ready for that. So I told myself a lie, the only one I could live with. When Frank answered, his voice gravelly with sleep, I gave him half the truth. I told him about Connor, about suspicion, about theft, about betrayal. I didn't say Rachel's name. I couldn't. Not yet. Robert, Frank said, his voice sharpening with old instinct. If you're right about this, it's not just theft. It's espionage. You sure you want me involved? Yes, I said, my voice low. But keep this quiet. No one else. Just you. All right, he sighed. Send me what you've got. But be careful. You might not like where this leads. The call ended, leaving me in the silence of a house that no longer felt like home. I sat there for hours, torn between relief and regret. Because by protecting Rachel's name, I had handed Connor's to the wolves. And soon, the consequences of that choice would come crashing down on all of us. Somewhere across town, as dawn began to stretch across North Carolina, Connor slid the flash drive into his laptop. The screen flickered, code running in the background, unseen, unstoppable. The trap was alive, and so was the war I had just started. Would you protect your child's name or expose them alongside their spouse? Let me know what you would have done. The days that followed were a blur of silence and waiting. Frank called only once, giving me the simplest instructions. Stay put. Don't interfere. We're watching him now. So I did what I was told. I stayed in my house, surrounded by memories that now felt poisoned, replaying every word Rachel had ever spoken to me. Her voice echoed in my head. The bedtime questions about my work. The way she used to say, "I'm proud of you, Dad." The way she whispered in that study, encouraging Connor to break into my safe. Had all those years meant nothing to her? Or had she been preparing for this moment all along? Meanwhile, Connor was moving fast. Frank and his team tailed him, tracking the flash drive as it pulsed signals into the night. Every time Connor plugged it in, they traced his steps. Cheap motels off I-85, shadowy meetings in parking lots, conversations in whispered tones with men who didn't belong in a firefighter's world. He wasn't cautious anymore. He thought he'd won. He thought the secrets on that drive would make him rich. What he didn't know was that every keystroke, every file he opened, every message he sent was being fed directly to the FBI. The sting was set for Friday. Frank didn't tell me the location, only that Connor had agreed to meet someone in Charlotte who was prepared to buy. I sat alone in my study that night, the safe door still ajar, the faint smell of steel and oil lingering like an open wound. The house was too quiet. Rachel was gone.
Off with Connor, I assumed.
The walls seemed to close in as I thought of her. Her wedding day, her first apartment, the time she came to me crying about life's disappointments, and I told her I'd always be there. Always. Now she had chosen a man over her father. And worse, she had chosen betrayal. Frank called at midnight. His voice was sharp, clipped. "It's done. We got him." I exhaled slowly, but the relief was poisoned by his next words. "You need to hear this part, Robert. When we pulled the records, bank transfers, offshore accounts, payment trails, they weren't just in his name. They're in hers too. Rachel's." The words hit me like a fist. "No," I whispered. She was just... "She's not just supporting him," Frank cut in. "She's in it. Active. The accounts were opened under her name. She moved the money. Without her, he couldn't have done half of this." My hand trembled around the phone. The truth was no longer suspicion. It was fact. Rachel wasn't just complicit. She was a partner. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window staring out at the quiet street, wondering how a father measures betrayal this deep. Is there a scale for when love is poisoned by greed? By morning, the story had broken. The arrest was on every local news channel. Charlotte firefighter arrested in espionage sting. But the second headline was the one that shattered me. Wife implicated in scheme. Financial records surface. Her name. My daughter's name. On television. In the papers. Rachel Whitfield. The world now knew what I had tried to deny.
That evening, I saw her for the first time since it all began. She walked through the front door of my house, her face pale, her eyes red as though she'd been crying for hours. But it wasn't guilt I saw there. It wasn't shame. It was fear. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking, "it's not what it looks like. I didn't know what Connor was doing with the accounts. I just signed papers. He told me it was for investments." But I had heard enough lies. I sat silent, staring at her the way a man stares at a stranger, because in that moment, that's all she was to me, a stranger. The news ticked on in the background, her name repeated over and over, her face flashing across the screen. And I thought of the question no father should ever have to face. Do I protect her, or do I let the truth consume her? Rachel turned to me, eyes wide, desperate for me to believe her. "Please, Dad," she begged, "tell me you don't think I betrayed you." But I said nothing, because the truth was already out there, and soon the world would know just how deep her betrayal ran. If your daughter betrayed you this deeply, would you forgive her or cut her off forever? Please let me know in the comments.
The courthouse in Charlotte was a fortress of stone and flashing cameras that morning. Reporters shouted questions, microphones stretched like spears toward anyone who even looked like they belonged to the case. And at the center of it all stood Connor. The once respected firefighter now wore an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled, his hair unkempt. The man who had been hailed as a community hero looked smaller somehow, crushed beneath the weight of chains and headlines. But it wasn't the cuffs or the cameras that broke him. It was me. Because he knew, just as I did, that I had set the trap that landed him there. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with tension. The prosecutor laid out the charges clearly. Conspiracy, attempted theft of classified information, unauthorized handling of government property. Every word tightened the noose. Rachel sat in the gallery, her face pale, lips pressed tight, avoiding every camera that tried to capture her. She was free, but not really. Her name had already been dragged through the mud. Every glance from the public, every whisper from the crowd was a sentence of its own. Then came the moment that rattled everyone. Connor stood, his voice cracking, his body shaking under the pressure. "You don't understand," he shouted, eyes darting around the room, finally landing on me. "He set me up. Robert Whitfield. He planted that drive. He made me walk into it." The judge banged her gavel, ordering silence, but Connor wasn't done. "He's not innocent. He's hiding things none of you understand. He kept files, secrets from his past, things worth millions. He baited me, and now you're all blind to it." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. The gavel struck again. Connor was dragged back into his seat, still shouting, his words echoing off the marble walls like a confession and an accusation rolled into one. And in that chaos, a thought struck me like lightning. He wasn't entirely wrong.
I had baited him. I had set the trap, watched him walk into it, and handed him to the FBI. I told myself it was justice. But sitting there, hearing him scream my name in that courtroom, I wondered if it was something else entirely. Vengeance. The line between the two blurred in that moment. Had I protected my family, or had I sacrificed them to satisfy the bitter taste of betrayal? Rachel's head sank lower with every word Connor spat. The cameras caught her tears, her shame, her silence. She wasn't guilty in the eyes of the law, but guilt had found her all the same. Her reputation was gone. Her name is stained forever. And worst of all, she knew I had a hand in it. When the gavel finally ended the session, the crowd erupted. Reporters surged forward, questions flying. "Mr. Whitfield, did you set up your son-in-law? Rachel, are you part of the conspiracy? Was the safe bait?" Security escorted us out, but the storm followed us onto the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed. Voices blurred. And then Rachel turned on me. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, but her eyes burned with something sharper than grief. Hatred. "You did this," she hissed, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "You made him fall, and you dragged me down with him." I opened my mouth, but no words came. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure if she was wrong.
The cameras captured the moment, father and daughter standing face to face, the silence between them louder than any gavel, any sentence. And as she turned and walked away, her love for me gone, replaced by something colder, I felt the weight of what I had done settle over me like chains. I stood alone on those courthouse steps, the cameras still clicking, the crowd still shouting. But the only sound I could hear was Rachel's voice in my head. "You made him fall." And maybe she was right. Was I a hero protecting my family? Or am I that man who sacrificed his own daughter to win? Let me know in the comments. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. The cameras were gone, the reporters had stopped calling, and the courthouse chaos had faded into memory. But the silence wasn't peace. It was the echo of everything I had lost. I sat in the study, the safe sealed shut once more, its cold steel surface gleaming in the lamplight. The flash drive was gone, the FBI had their case, and Connor was facing years, maybe decades behind bars. Rachel, though, untouched by the law, was ruined in another way. The newspapers branded her a conspirator. Neighbors who once smiled at her now whispered behind her back. Employers looked away.
Friends kept their distance. Her reputation was ashes, and she hadn't spoken to me since the courthouse steps. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the tick of the clock on the wall. For the first time in months, no one was sneaking through my hallways, no one was prying at my safe, no one was whispering in the dark. Connor was gone, Rachel was gone, and my revenge was complete. But satisfaction was a strange companion. It wasn't joy, it wasn't a victory. It was the quiet acknowledgement that I had won, and in winning, I had destroyed the very thing I had sworn to protect, my family.
I thought of Rachel as a little girl, running through the backyard in the Carolina sun, hair flying, laughter ringing like music. That little girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who hated me. And maybe, just maybe, if she ever discovered the full truth, she would hate me even more. Because the files in that safe weren't just old schematics and records. They were reminders of choices I had made in a world she would never fully understand. Choices that had saved lives, yes, but also ended them. If she ever opened that safe and saw the truth I had kept buried, she wouldn't just see me as a father who had trapped her husband. She would see me as something far worse. I ran my hand across the steel door, the lock cold beneath my fingertips. I could almost hear Connor's voice echoing from the courtroom, shouting for the world to listen. "He's hiding things! Things none of you understand!" Maybe he was right, but the truth was mine to bear. And so I sat there, the silence pressing in around me, the weight of secrets heavy on my shoulders. Revenge hadn't come with noise and fury. It had come quietly, with the turn of a dial, with the planting of a drive, with the silence of a man who let his enemies walk straight into the fire. And when the smoke cleared, I was the last one standing.
But silence has its own scars. Every creak of the house reminded me of Rachel's footsteps. Every shadow in the hall reminded me of Connor's sneaking form. They were gone, but they haunted me still. Maybe they always would. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk, whispering into the emptiness of the study. Sometimes revenge doesn't end with noise and fury. It ends in silence. And in that silence, the scars remain. Scars that never fade. Do you think my revenge was justice? Or did I destroy my family in the process? For more beautiful stories like this, please subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and leave me a comment to know if you enjoyed the story.